He was in the beginning with God. The Logos is given the personal pronoun he. Is this the correct translation? Because nowhere in Greek philosophy was the Logos ever considered to be a person or a being. It seemed to be an it or a this and that. Yeah. And Unitarians would argue that the word is used 300 times in the New Testament, and it is always referred to as an it or this and that.
Now, so there's a question being asked of Dr. Bernard. I'll play his answer here in a second. But just in passing, this question is based upon an inadequate understanding of what's called lexical semantics. The term logos has a very wide semantic domain. It can have reference to a large number of things. And so it's very contextually derived. And in John 1:1, the Logos is specifically said to be eternal, to be in the present proston theon with the Father, and as to his nature, the Logos is identified as being theos, God, and that all things are made through him, and apart from him is nothing made which was made, and that life itself is made in him, and that the Logos becomes flesh in John 1:14. And so Christians down through the ages have recognized that this Logos is not some impersonal thing. It's amazing to me. I understand fully why so many commentaries will be focused upon looking at the philosophical use of Logos in Greek philosophy, as if that's the primary background of the Gospel of John. I think that is a major mistake. If you want to start with a truly biblical understanding of what the Logos would be to a first century Jew like John, you're going to start with the Memra. You're going to start with the word in Jewish theology, primarily in the Tanakh, but that was certainly developed in some very interesting fashions in the intertestamental period. I think that's a significantly more accurate background to draw from, rather than just simply some Greek philosophical concept being imported en toto straight into the story of Jesus by one of the apostles. Seems very strange, but you'll certainly find that in a lot of commentaries. Here is Dr. Bernard's response.
Well, I really don't have a problem with the translation. I do recognize that Greek nouns, the Greek noun logos, all nouns in Greek are masculine, feminine, or neuter. So you have to use logos as masculine. So it's going to have a masculine pronoun, regardless of how you would interpret it in English. I don't really have a problem with the masculine pronoun in English in looking towards the later manifestation, Jesus Christ. But I do recognize that logos is not intended to be a separate person.
Now, that's just an assertion. How do you recognize that? How do you recognize that in light of the assertions concerning the Logos and the distinction of the Logos from theos? Even especially in light of the parallel in John 1:18, where clearly you have the monogenes theos being distinguished from, yet perfectly unified with, the Father. It's the Logos incarnate who explains the person of the Father. See, again, for those who aren't overly familiar with oneness theology, and sadly, that's a large portion of folks these days, it's not the most popular or growing group, but they are there. There's been a lot of controversy over the years concerning the fact that there are a number of well-known Christian singing groups that come out of oneness Pentecostalism, have a history in oneness Pentecostalism, and that this raises all sorts of issues as to those groups' participation in Christian gatherings and so on and so forth. But in oneness theology, God is one person. So it's Unitarian monotheism. just like Islam. It's Unitarian monotheism. But they affirm the deity of Christ. Well, how do they do that? They turn Jesus into multiple persons, though they don't use the term person in the same way. So Jesus is a human man indwelt by God the Father. So Jesus's prayer life, and again, this when you read Bernard's book, any oneness person is just going to struggle horribly. And in this podcast, they're asking him the tough questions, and a lot of them had to do with this, will struggle horribly to try to explain the prayer life of Jesus. Because if there's only one person of God, then who is Jesus praying to? And I don't believe that Dr. Bernard has an answer for that. He certainly didn't in the podcast. Well, that's just a mystery because Jesus is unique. Well, wait a minute. Jesus uses personal pronouns. And given the constant differentiation made between the Father and the Son, they are never confused. Even John 10:30, I and the Father, we are one. Esmen, not the singular, the plural. We are one. Given that, the answer to Jesus' prayer life is very clear. And this is the great Achilles heel. I just don't believe that there is any defense for the oneness position at this point because of the clarity of biblical revelation. But from their perspective, Jesus is two persons, the Father, the deity, and the Son is the human being. So in their theology, then, the Son is a created being, came into existence in Bethlehem, not eternally God. That's just the human aspect. The divine aspect, the Father, and he indwells Jesus, and so Jesus is God because he's indwelt by the Father. So the prayer issue becomes extremely difficult to understand from their perspective because is that the human side praying to the divine side? Then how can the human side say, glorify me with the glory, Father, I had with you before the world was? Because the human side was created at his birth in Bethlehem. So none of it makes any sense. They have to try to get into very, very difficult explanations based upon, well, the Logos and God's looking to the future, and so he's acting as if the future is already reality in this sense, and it gets extremely complex and convoluted and complicated and things like that. But you just had the assertion here, well, the Logos isn't a person. The natural reading of John would say, yes, he is.
I think, the King James says the same was in the beginning with God. So it kind of is neutral there. It doesn't commit itself one way or the other.
Well, hutos there would be in reference to the Logos, and if you translated the Logos as person, and I can guarantee you every one of the King James translators believed the Logos was a person, then that wouldn't make any sense.
Which I think is probably accurate in the context. So it's not really until you get to Jesus Christ that you definitely are attributing the human personal identity of Jesus Christ, who is a man.
Well, the Logos became flesh, but the Logos hasn't changed. It's the same Logos that existed eternally, becomes flesh in the person of Jesus Christ, and we beheld his glory. The glory is of the unique one from the Father, full of grace and truth. Did that just start to be true of the Logos at the incarnation? Of course not. Now, there's more that was said there, but then they bring up an objection, and guess where the objection came from?
Respond to someone like James White, who would...
Now remember, did you say that the radio programs are on Sermon Audio too? Is there a date on them? 2001? Wow, because see, my recollection was we did both of those the same day. But you're saying they were 2 years apart. See what happens when the years go rolling by. It's been nearly 20 years. Yeah. It's been nearly 20 years since a radio encounter. And the first objection they bring up is from that. That's okay. All right.
Respond to someone like James White, who who, when he looks at that passage, he says this is an accusative case, and he says that the word pros in Greek would it literally means face to face, and that it indicates an intimacy.
Well, first of all, I would say.
Well, first of all, that's not just me. As I have noted many times, in fact, in my debate with Robert Sabin, I specifically quoted Dr. A.T. Robertson on this issue. So it's not like I'm claiming some standing as defining the Greek language. There are Greek grammarians who have made the same observation, and I have simply repeated it, and that is that you have to recognize what is being asserted in each one of the three clauses of John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word. The Word is without beginning, does not have a point in origin. By the use of the imperfect form of I, me there, rather than the use of the aorist agenita, no reference to beginning point, origin, creation. As far back as you want to push the beginning, the Word is. And the Word was proston theon. There was a personal relationship between the Logos and God. Now, who is being referred to by God is going to be defined for us all the way down verse 18. It's the bookending thing. It's going to be repeated down there and defined for us with more clarity, specifically the Father. But what's first being stated is that there is an eternal relationship between the Logos and the Father. And then the Logos is as to his nature, and this is an eternity past. See, the oneness thing, the oneness position collapses here because the Son is not truly God until the incarnation. Well, the Son doesn't even exist until the incarnation. The Son's a created being, so the Son's not eternal. Well, the Logos is eternal, and the Logos is as to his nature God. Not the. They actually have to twist it so far as to say, well, God's looking at it from an eternal perspective, and from the eternal perspective, you can sort of see that the Logos is being treated as if the incarnation's a present reality, even though it happens in time, and it's exactly what happens when you've created an external belief and then you try to force on text rather than driving it from the text. The text tells us that just as eternal as the Logos is, and just as eternally the relationship between the Logos and the Father has existed, the Logos is as to his nature deity. That's what we're being told. That's what John 1:1 is saying.
The Greek can only take you so far. You cannot build an entire doctrine out of a Greek word.
And of course, nobody is. You didn't hear me doing that, did you? What you heard me doing was taking all of John 1:1, actually the prologue of John, verses 1 through 18, and harmonizing all of it and deriving my belief from it. I did not base a theology on one word. This is why a debate is useful, because if that allegation was made, especially in cross-examination, it's going up in flames immediately. That's what is so valuable about that, because I can sit here and respond to them. They can then respond to me. I can respond to them. We can go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. But when you all get together in the same room, the dynamic changes. It changes everything. That's what debate is for. And we're up for it.
Because you can translate the same arguments back into English. You don't have to know Greek. Greek can help you, but certain translations or certain grammatical points, certain word definitions can open up possibilities. But they're not going to be definitive on a major theological issue, just one word standing alone.
And of course, we see where this is going. That's not what I did. And that then opens the opportunity of saying, okay, you tell me what proston theon means. How is the Logos proston theon? Using the imperfect form of I, me. And then I'll explain my side, and then you can let the people, judge who are listening.